I was eager to get back, but there was a difficulty at Victoria. I'd printed the wrong travel document, one without the passenger number, which meant 5 minutes arguing with an inspector before he let me on the coach. When we started to move, I told myself the day had been a success. I'd been to an exhibition in a smart gallery near Bond Street. I'd sat over coffee in a Belgravia pub, which had been a haunt of gangsters and royals. Then I had gone to the embassy. In the February dark, moving along the Westway, I thought of my grandmother. How afraid she must have been nearly 80 years ago. Before they reached the border, 2 sets of officials came on the train and started to work their way through the carriages. The air in the compartment changed. At the last minute, something might go wrong. My mother had been about to take a chocolate, quickly, because she'd never been given so many sweets and they would be taken away soon. The men entered and the customs officer asked how much money they were taking out of the country. My grandparents showed him the contents of their wallets. My mother held out 2 coins, a 10 pfennig and a 2 pfennig piece. A different official took my grandparents' passports, checked the entries and examined the photographs. He looked at my grandparents to see if their faces matched the pictures. Then he handed the documents back and both officers left. My mother helped herself to another chocolate, the sort with marzipan inside. We had been making progress. I was beginning to calculate when I might put the key in my own front door, but then the coach slowed. The numbers on the gantries overhead changed from 60 to 40, 40 to 30. A voice crackled from the driver's radio. A breakdown ahead with 1 lane blocked. Best to leave at the next junction. My mother and grandparents caught an overnight ship from the Hook of Holland and crossed the North Sea. The following day they went quickly through immigration and also through customs where their hand luggage was cleared. But there was no sign of the trunks my grandmother had registered from Berlin to Harwich. Could their luggage have got left on the quay or not been removed from the hold? At first my mother had stared at the gentlemen and ladies in the crowd, inventing lives for them. She could understand the odd word, which helped. Now they were the only people left. The other passengers had collected their belongings and gone for the boat train. Her parents were having a discussion. Cousin Max ought to be told about the wait. They should telephone him. That was the most important thing. But how was this to be done? My grandmother pointed to a booth at one end of the customs hall. The phone boxes were not yellow, but red here. One put a small coin in the slot, then spoke to the operator. It was quite straightforward. But my grandfather said they did not have coins, just banknotes, and Max would have set out by now. It was a bad plan. My mother did not like it when they talked that way. Papa would speak extra slowly while Mammy's voice got high and loud. She felt in her pocket and held out the 2 pfennig piece. "I've got a coin." They told her no, it was not the right sort of money. At this moment, the trunks were brought by a man who said there was another train departing from platform 3, but they must hurry. My coach crawled to the slip road, then left the motorway. I must have closed my eyes because when I looked out next, it was Solihull. We were passing houses with their upstairs windows lit. I thought of parents putting small children to bed, reading them stories, kissing them good night, sweet dreams and see you in the morning. My husband, who had gone down with the cold, might also be in bed, waiting for me to return. "How does it feel?" he would ask. "Different?" And I'd shake my head. The same. I could text him about the diversion, but perhaps he was already asleep. I hoped so, because there wasn't much to say. From the end of June till October, when I made the application, we did nothing but talk. Suddenly our lives had been turned upside down. My troubled history was our one hope. When the train driven into Liverpool Street, my mother thought it was an ugly place, but she liked the way they had taxis and cars parked right by the railway lines. There was also a young man in a raincoat, Cousin Max, waving at them. The grown-ups shook hands. They said, At last, and how wonderful! Max asked about the journey, but did not wait for an answer. He grabbed some baggage and led them to one of the cars. Only when the bags had been loaded, he said, "You look worn out." Cousin Max suggested they go to the buffet. My mother knew this was a cafe. Near their flat, except it wasn't theirs now, Cafe Volta's sold splendid cakes. All of them enjoyed going there until the notice went up. The station buffet was nothing like Cafe Volta's. Inside was dark and their table was sticky. Their cousin ordered tea for everyone, but when the drinks came, they looked odd. My mother whispered that the counter lady had made a mistake. Grandmother said all people in England had tea with milk in, and she was to drink up. Between sips of tea, my mother clutched the pfennigs in her pocket. The grown-ups were busy with the usual talk about which people had left and who was waiting for their visa to arrive. This was annoying because she wanted to ask about the right kind of money. We edged into Digbeth. Inside the coach the heating was on, but I felt cold. The first thing I'd do after I got in was put on the kettle. A tannoy announcement reminded us to take our possessions. Mine were at my feet because a locker meant not being able to keep an eye on them. I'd brought my largest handbag, more of a briefcase, so the documents would not get spoiled. Now I undid the clasps to make one last check. The certificate had been a disappointment. I'd imagined something shiny and rich, not ordinary paper. But the eagles brought some consolation. There were 4, all with spread wings, enlarged talons and long tail feathers, a black eagle on top and a pair underneath from London and Cologne. These 2 were stamped in blue ink. I hadn't noticed the final bird straight away. It was watermarked in a shade of green, only just darker than the background. This was by far the largest eagle, so big it resembled a griffin or a dragon. Einbürgerungsurkunde. Very quietly I tried the word. The syllables fell over each other, and the umlaut was hard. I said it again, pursing my lips. That was supposed to be the way, but it still wasn't correct. I must think of my grandmother. She would help. But this wasn't a time for conjuring the dead. It was time to shuffle down the aisle of the coach, spill into the forecourt, then over the street, hoping a number 50 would come. Nothing came. A man who was talking loudly to himself stood next to me in the queue, so I walked to the corner. Then several buses, including the 50, appeared at once and I had to rush back. On board, I allowed the city to slide by. We passed the Chinese centre, the warehouses that were now flats. But rather than turn at the garage, we carried on to the roundabout, taking the road that went east. The darkness was thicker there, or maybe the lampposts were just insufficiently bright. Small shops defended themselves with iron grills. 1 or 2 remained open, selling fried chicken, pizza, kebabs. It was clear what had happened. This wasn't my bus. I only had to touch the bell for the stop sign to appear and they'd let me off. Yet I sat motionless as the driver went on, taking me further and further from home.